Now it happened on the second Sabbath after the first, that he went through the grain fields, and his disciples plucked the heads of grain, and ate them, rubbing them in their hands. And some of the Pharisees said to them, What you are doing is not lawful to do on the Sabbath. But Jesus answering them said, Have you not even read this, what David did when he was hungry, he and those who were with him? How he went into the house of God, took and ate the showbread, and also gave some to those with him, which is not lawful for any but the priests to eat. And he said to them, The Son of Man is also Lord of the Sabbath. Now it happened on another Sabbath also that he entered the synagogue, and taught them. And a man was there whose right hand was withered. So the scribes and Pharisees watched him closely, whether he would heal on the Sabbath, that they might find an accusation against him. But he knew their thoughts, and said to the man who had a withered hand, Arise and stand here. And he arose and stood. Then Jesus said to them, I will ask you one thing. Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy? And when he had looked around at them all, he said to the man, Stretch out your hand. And he did so, and his hand was restored as whole as the other. But they were filled with rage and discussed with one another what they might do with Jesus. My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we share together these words from Luke chapter 6. We've read verses 1 to 11. Luke has emphasized the fact that Jesus' ministry was focused on the Sabbaths and in the synagogues. Although he was busy the rest of the time dealing with individuals and no doubt talking to people, his emphasis was to go and meet people in the synagogue and to declare to them the words of God. Now, chapter 6 begins with a phrase I do not understand and I find quite intriguing. Now, it happened on the second Sabbath after the first that he went through the grain fields. The actual Greek says the second first Sabbath, and William MacDonald in the Believer's Commentary says that the first Sabbath was the first after Passover, that is the day when the first fruits were offered in the temple, and the second is the following Sabbath. Luke has previously mentioned two particular Sabbaths. When he was in Nazareth, he read from Isaiah the prophet and proclaimed, This scripture is fulfilled in your hearing this day. And they sought to throw him over the cliff and kill him. The second was in Capernaum, where he spoke. A man with an evil spirit opposed him, and he drove out the evil spirit. And later that day he went round to Peter's house and healed Peter's mother-in-law, and that evening healed many other people at Peter's door. Now we have the account of a third Sabbath encounter, at the beginning of spring, when the early harvest was ready, the second Sabbath after Passover. His disciples plucked the heads of grain and ate them as they walked from one place to another through the fields. They rubbed them with their hands and ate, and this was noticed by the Pharisees. So in chapter 5 we saw the Pharisees had come together to discuss Jesus and to examine him. Their first objection was that he forgave sin, and only God can forgive sin. They didn't object him to healing people, but they did object him to working on the Sabbath. And that's exactly what the disciples were doing. They were picking grain. They were harvesting and thrashing on the Sabbath. Well, of course, we need to understand what work is. And they were very particular with their rules of what work was. So to pick grain was work. But they were allowed to eat on the Sabbath. And of course, when we work, we expect to get paid. The disciples were not getting paid for their work. They weren't bringing in the harvest and storing it up for another day. They were satisfying the immediate need of hunger. And so one can argue that they were not working at all. They were simply eating. They didn't take any home with them. But Jesus answers the complaint by referring back to an incident in the life of David. When David fled for his life, some young men went with him, but he had no food to feed them. And he came to Abimelech the priest, asking for some bread and maybe a weapon. Well, the priest said, "There's no food here except the showbread which has just now been taken out of the tabernacle, because it's been replaced with fresh bread." Now normally only the priests could eat this, because this was the showbread, the holy bread, but the priest allowed David and those with him to eat it, if they were holy. And indeed he said they were holy. They'd been travelling for 3 days. He was hungry. There was a need. It wasn't being sacrilegious. The bread was to be eaten anyway. So while technically it was not lawful, yet in the circumstances it was totally acceptable to the Lord. The Lord had no complaint about the priest giving David the bread. And this establishes a principle. The Son of Man is also Lord of the Sabbath. It's up to God to say what's permitted and what's not permitted, not up to Pharisees to make arbitrary rules. Jesus would in fact have a lot to say about the Sabbath, because this was the only area really that the Pharisees had a go at him, the things that he did on the Sabbath. And in these areas he was breaking their rules, not God's rules. He uses his title. This is the second time that he's used it, the Son of Man. This is a title that comes from the book of Daniel, and it is a messianic title because the throne of Israel was given to the Son of Man. But it's a less confronting title than the Son of God, which is a title we might use, for we see a man who we recognize as God. Jesus was God in the appearance of a man, and so he calls himself the Son of Man. We then have another incident, another Sabbath. He entered the synagogue, and the scribes and Pharisees had a set-up. There was a man there whose right hand was withered, and they put him there to see whether Jesus would heal on the Sabbath. Because if he did, then they would complain that he was working. But again, when Jesus healed, he didn't charge a fee. It's not like a doctor who says, "Hand over some money and I'll see what I can do for you." No, there was no fee applied when Jesus healed. But Jesus knew their plan and their thinking, and so he called the man forward and asked the Pharisees one question: "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save life or destroy?" What he's actually doing here is saying there's a principle involved. It's not a matter of following arbitrary rules. There's a principle involved. And the principle is to do good or to do evil, to save life or destroy. And so this man's life was impaired. To restore his hand meant that you were giving him the opportunity to work, to earn his living, to participate in society. It was a good thing to do. It would be wrong if we were not to do it, because to not do it means that his working ability is impaired. Well, having asked the question, he looked at them, but they did not respond. And so he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." As he stretched it out, it was restored as the other. So yes, Jesus did heal him, but did Jesus do any work? All he did was speak. He gave the man the command, "Stretch out your hand." The man responded by stretching out his hand. Jesus didn't touch him, didn't manipulate him. What work did he do? He simply spoke. They were filled with rage. Rage because their plan to convict him had backfired on them. They needed another plan, and they discussed with one another what else they might do to Jesus. The lessons for us are two. First, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. And on the Sabbath, as on any day, it is lawful to do good, to save life.